Limbo. Originally released in July of 2010 via Danish independent studio Playdead, is a game that, by now at least, you will likely be more than well aware of. And for pretty good reason. Now, I have to admit, covering Limbo wasn't exactly at the top of my long list of other games that I've been slowly working my way towards. I kid you not, I have so much that I want to eventually get to, it's bordering on a fucking joke. So, to divert my attention from that monolithic list of games to instead then focus on one of the most successful indie titles ever made, that has not only achieved considerable commercial performance, but has also enjoyed the darling pleasure of awards, best of year listing positions, and a similarly structured spiritual sequel that, by many accounts, was actually better than its predecessor, yeah, I didn't think I'd be making this one anytime soon, simply due to the fact that it didn't really feel necessary. I figured that if I was going to say anything about Limbo, it was probably going to be something that's already been said. Everyone even remotely familiar with the game knows everything there is to know about Limbo. The game found itself thriving within something of a hype frenzy when first released all the way back in 2010, right smack bang in the middle of the golden era of PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 releases. It somehow dodged past such massively successful titles as Bioshock 2, Red Dead Redemption, God of War 3 and Heavy Rain, to then capture the attention of both the mainstream video game journalists and the general widespread population of your average bona fide gamers. Let's also not forget that this was long before the appearance of some of the most popular, well-known indie titles today, such as Undertale, Hollow Knight, Don't Starve, Stardew Valley, and hell, even before the official post-beta release of fucking Minecraft. Limbo came before all of that. And if truth be told, a lot of people have spent years speculating on this game's world, on its characters, and on the implied narrative that simmers throughout. From the most gruesome aspects to its most uplifting. That's a pretty damn impressive feat for an indie game released more than a decade ago, compared to how easily accessible the independent dev market is these days, either via Steam, itch.io, the PlayStation Store, and so forth. When you compare it to what was actually being produced at the time of Limbo's release, the console-based indie market was still very much in its infancy throughout the late 2000s to early 2010s. So getting your game seen on anything other than a PC was really hard work back then. And yet, this game, this intriguing little puzzle game, absolutely full to the brim with stark, oppressive visual design, completely stole the show. Everyone was talking about Limbo when it first appeared, and this appearance was seemingly out of nowhere via a brand new, unproven studio based in Copenhagen, largely made up of 8 permanent employees led by the former IO Interactive developer Arndt Jensen and co-founder Dino Paddy, plus a handful of freelancers who would come and go as needs be. So again, regardless of whether or not you even like this game, what Limbo achieved within the realm of early 2010s independent gaming was a massive accomplishment, completely deserving of the respect and accolades that it garnered. But that also now brings us to the question of why? Why, after 12 years since its release, when everything that can be said about this game has probably already been said, why am I talking about it now? Well, because I want to, okay? Well, no. It's also because, after finally playing it again after 12 long years in Asgard, 12 long years since the game's initial release, I really couldn't help but notice that Limbo hasn't lost a single microscopic drop of what made this game so goddamn captivating back in the day. Within seconds of booting it up, I had immediately fallen back in love with everything about the game that made it so compelling in the first place. And then before I knew it, I was writing this script. So, let's have a gander, shall we? Okay, just in case you haven't played this game yet, let me offer a rough summary of what you will actually be doing in Limbo. And I guess I should also flag up a spoiler warning. It's hard to get into this game on a detailed level without revealing most of it, But with that being said, I'm going to be keeping away from some of the more story-explicit theories and just try to focus on what stands out the most to me. There's a colossal megapint ton of fan theories, videos, and comment threads out there about Limbo's story, so I'd rather stay clear of it as much as possible so that this video doesn't just spiral into another Limbo explained thing. There are plenty of them around that are likely far better researched. But again, even so, if you haven't played Limbo yet, I'd recommend that you do so before watching this video. I'm just gonna sit here and listen to the Atmos for 5 seconds while you make up your mind. Okay, upon loading into the game, you take control of a young boy who awakens to find themselves completely alone, laying in the grass of the darkest, most foreboding forest you ever did see. There's no one around you, no sign of distant civilization, no explanation for you even being here, and no definitive goal to pursue. You are isolated, completely removed from the safety of an older, more mature guardian, if indeed from a story point of view, the boy ever happened to have one. So instead, you're left with no other choice but to take in the world you see around you. And regardless of how creepy it might be, it's also undeniably peaceful, beautiful in a way even. Yet you also cannot refer to the place in which you find yourself as safe, and the only other option available to you is to move. So you simply stand up and walk forward. And that's it, that's the game, to keep on moving forward. And I mean this very literally. There's no future narration or clear-cut story to speak of, no secondary characters that you can eventually speak to, or even any form of basic combat mechanic. Instead, at its core, Limbo is a 2D puzzle platformer in which you proceed from left to right, exploring the environment ahead of you while overcoming various physics-based obstacles that will gradually become more and more elaborate, and you'll also have to outsmart the occasional NPC along the way. And if that sounds like a simple concept, well, it is. But it's everything else that surrounds you that makes this game a very, very intoxicating experience. So for starters, I need to offer you a piece of advice. If you're going to play Limbo, you're going to want to do so while wearing a decent set of headphones, and you're also going to want to play this game in the dark. I cannot stress to you enough how much immersion and allowing yourself to be drawn into the world of Limbo is important here. If you're playing this thing on cheap speakers in broad daylight, you're essentially wasting everything that makes this game good. Do not go into Limbo with the expectation of an elaborately gameplay-focused experience, because the literal gameplay of Limbo really isn't all that special. If anything, the further into Limbo you progress, the more familiar you will become with the ideas Playdead are toying with, and from a raw gameplay point of view, these aren't the most innovative or inspired. Aside from the odd gravity-based puzzle platforming, a few logic-based solutions, and the occasional run away far away where they can't find us threat, this is about as exciting as it gets. And now sure, that's not to say that it doesn't feel good to eventually move past an obstacle. It can in fact be a rather exhilarating moment to finally realise a solution and execute it accordingly. But even with that in mind, it really can't be denied that the core gameplay loop of Limbo is, at its absolute best, a rather shallow one. You walk in a singular direction and identify the solutions to different puzzles via a process that is mostly trial and error based. If you fail or die, you will then immediately reload barely 5 feet away, in order to try again, and again, and again, until you eventually get it right. Hardly the most nuanced approach to puzzle platforming. However, let me be clear, in spite of me saying this, I don't dislike the gameplay of Limbo. In fact, I rather adore it. While I can't say that I'm outright impressed with Limbo's gameplay loop even after replaying it all these years later, I also couldn't think of a single thing that I'd want to change about it. There's little to praise, and yet I truly loved every minute of it. Because as much as a more elaborate gameplay system might seem beneficial to a game, it's through Limbo's simplicity that our attention is instead diverted to the world of Limbo itself, and by extension, the most compelling aspect of the game: the atmosphere. As you journey deeper into the game, it becomes clear that every little piece of development time not spent on refining the gameplay of Limbo, that wasn't spent on extending the game's runtime through more extravagant puzzles or implementing more diverse NPC interactions, every scrap of time and resources saved was, without a doubt, entirely spent on perfecting the game's absolutely exquisite atmosphere, which is largely embellished upon through two key factors: the game's strikingly bleak visual style, and the coinciding wonderfully rich sound design. Everything from the most peaceful woodland valley to the rain-soaked rooftops, or to the churning mechanical factory locations seen in the latter half of the game, everything within the world of Limbo feels alive. And much like the titular town of Silent Hill, it can often give the impression of being its own separate character all by itself. In fact, while playing through Limbo again all these years later, and having spent way too long talking about Silent Hill in my lifetime, it honestly surprised me how much of Limbo holds considerable homage to Silent Hill's core DNA, from the depressing, overbearing nature of the atmosphere, to them being occasionally peppered with moments of calm meditation to reflect on the journey behind you, and the difficult steps that inevitably lie ahead. Even the grainy filter and misty fog-drenched landscapes are an easy comparison to Silent Hill's similarly structured environmental design. And, again, much like the franchise that I just cannot stop wrapping my tender little transparent beans around and snuggling the ever-loving shit out of it, Limbo's world is one that always feels threatening, even during moments of seemingly calm solitude. There's little denying how much the environment and atmosphere of Limbo tends to lend itself to one very specific mood. But it's not quite literally loneliness, because the locations you explore are absolutely full to the brim with the life and momentum of machines and living beings. Instead, it's the unsettling nature of simply feeling alone, trapped in a world that is alien to you and surrounded by things that you do not understand nor have any real control over in how you deal with them. No matter how isolated the main character appears, there's never a single moment within this game that feels truly empty. There is always a jittering piece of audio design to further imply a buzzing, vibrant ecosystem that is mere meters away from you, be it biological or mechanical. And so, to dial back to what I was saying earlier, I really cannot emphasize how fucking good the sound design of Limbo is. It's gorgeous. In fact, here, let me offer you a short montage of different locations. Just listen to this game. I'm sorry, but if you don't like this, I don't know what to tell you, because Limbo easily offers some of the most vibrant, wonderful sound design that I have had the pleasure of experiencing in a long time. From the subtle shift in dragging audio as the crate scrapes along water-drenched soil to grass, or the moaning creak of the hotel ladder sign as it rolls gently under your weight, or the harsh carnivorous snap of bear traps. There's not a single moment or action in this game that hasn't seen the loving attention of a carefully selected sound cue, and it's addicting listening out for these, hearing the painstaking effort made to ensure that the specific soundbite is appropriate for the moment. It all blends in for a perfect example of atmosphere. But that's not the only thing about this game that's worth talking about, because in spite of the fact that I've somewhat criticised the gameplay of Limbo, that's not to say it can't be extremely compelling at times. The world of Limbo is an undeniably cruel and unforgiving one, fully prepared to punish you for the slightest miscalculation or misstep. However, what's even more fascinating is that you are often dishing out the punishment just as frequently, and with an arguably equal amount of indifference. As mentioned earlier, your only presented option is to move forward in the game. Yet with that decision comes a series of consequences that, if you actually stop to think about it for a moment and allow the impact of the boy's journey to settle into the back of your mind, also cause into question the validity of your own actions, especially when these come into direct contact with any of the infrequent NPCs of the game. And I say NPC because, as opposed to using the expected term enemy, throughout a lot of this game, there's an uncomfortable feeling of uncertainty regarding whether or not the creatures and other humans you run into are by literal definition evil and do in fact want to kill you, or if these are just perhaps entities and other people simply dealing with an unknown intruder that puts them at risk. Take the small tribe of boys for example. If you consider what you're actually doing by dismantling the numerous haphazard defenses constructed by the boys, what you're actually doing is endangering them to something else. These are huge traps that you're setting off, likely designed for something much bigger than you, perhaps something carnivorous. It's no wonder that they want you to kindly fuck off. To look at another example, I'm sure you've all seen snippets of the famous spider sequence. It's quite possibly the most recognisable moment of the entire game, and for good reason. It's absolutely horrifying at first. However, when you dial back your first encounter with the spider to its most basic facts, you are the aggressor here. The spider simply wishes to be left alone. It will only kill you if you approach too closely, and even offers the boy a warning by slowly raising a leg into its striking position. And you know what? That is how most animals and creatures tend to react when an unfamiliar entity encroaches upon their territory. They grow defensive, they attack, they kill out of a pure instinct to protect themselves. And hey, guess what? That's also how people tend to react when wild animals or other humans seemingly attempt to cause them harm. Which is exactly what the boys are trying to do. To you. And what's even funnier is the fact that when you do bypass the spider by chopping off two of its limbs, the same spider or one of its brethren then vengefully chases after you, even to the point of breaking into the nearby campsite. Which, let's not forget, was only made possible by you disabling its defenses. So when the dust is finally settled and you can take a moment to regard the carnage that the boy has inadvertently caused over the last 5 minutes, while he never shows any sign of enjoying the things that occur in his wake, it isn't much of a stretch to conclude that the blame for such incidents largely falls on the boy's shoulders. And this is a common trend that you will very much get used to. Everywhere the boy goes, death follows. You kill things, or by extension they kill themselves and each other. Because you are the one trespassing here. You're the intruder, a stray, wandering through the world without any true comprehension of where you're going or the consequences of your actions until it's simply too late to do anything about it. And you really can't help but wonder whether or not the damage you're causing is worth it for the greater good of your quest to do... what exactly? What is your goal here, aside from the basic functional need to walk forwards because the game demands it from a mechanics point of view? And when I say damage, I really do mean it. Like a ball in a china shop, everywhere the boy travels, a form of destruction will often transpire, from flooding or causing deadly hazards to occur, to luring a pissed off arachnid into a den of warrior children, or even ripping off the limbs of multiple creatures so that you can proceed. There's even a moment where the boy chases a small rodent into an energy generation wheel so that there's enough power to open the way forward. You literally enslave an innocent creature to do your bidding. And I'm sorry, but this little guy is fucked. There's no way it's getting off this thing without death or at least a severe injury, so all that's probably going to happen here is that it's eventually going to collapse in exhaustion mid-sprint and then immediately be churned into meat paste. You did this! Alright, to cycle back through everything that's been said so far, I'm going to now pause and ask 2 questions. 1, why have I just spent the last 5 to 10 minutes ranting about how the boy is effectively a Grim Reaper in disguise? And 2, aside from the atmosphere and the sound design, what else is the appeal of this game? Well, to answer the first, I want to repeat my previous sentiment that the world of Limbo is an undeniably harsh one, and while I have to a certain degree just painted the main character as an evil little shit, that's not actually what I'm trying to do here. Instead, it's more the fact that, like the world itself around you, your actions can be just as unflinchingly cruel. There are plenty of bodies seen in the background or littered throughout this game that offers a clear indication of how truly unforgiving this environment is, from falling prey to traps themselves, or drowning, or simply collapsing one day in the sunlight, never to get back up again. What you're doing is merely an extension of that. So to now answer the second question, if the gameplay loop itself isn't all that great, and the general nature of the game is borderline nihilistic at times, why play Limbo? Well, as much as I admittedly adore the moody, bleak tone that simmers throughout most of this game, if I had to point towards anything else, I would point towards the brief instances of hope. To refocus on the puzzle platform gameplay for a moment, and also to disregard any explicit or implied consequences of said gameplay, how Limbo chooses to test you throughout the game will often fall into 2 separate brackets. A trial of grasping the solution through fear-induced panic, or a test of logic-based quick thinking. And depending on how quickly or confidently you deal with either one of these will often determine your failure rate. If you should perhaps behave more erratically or more impulsive while scrambling to flee from the spider or a buzzsaw, you're more likely to be penalised for it as opposed to if you'd address the issue calmly. And on the flip side, if you should grow more restless or irritated while navigating a physics-based puzzle, the solution may end up being completely blind to you, even if it's staring you in the face. There are actually a fair few moments such as this where the solution is right there for you to see, yet it also takes a stubborn 5 minutes of, no, I'm sure I can get past this using the crate, how could I be doing this wrong? And then suddenly you might notice the dangling rope or chain literally right next to you. So, when all is said and done and your time with Limbo has finally come to an end, regardless of how you interpret the ending or the obstacles you face, what ultimately becomes clear is that these are all simply the heightened fears of a young boy, a terrifying case of arachnophobia, a group of school bullies harming or isolating a lone individual, a fear of the dark, or to be alone, or drowning, a sickened reaction towards insects or small rodents, a wary fear of structures, strangers, or adults that you aren't familiar with or do not trust, and even a curious regard for all things mechanical or infused with electricity that, while fascinating and are perhaps awe-inspiring, can also be dangerous, intimidating things. For a small child still trying to grasp the nature of the world around us and deal with the simple fact of being alive, Limbo takes virtually every single individual fear that a child might experience and then goes on to amplify these massively, either literally through the size of an object or a creature, or via the severity in which it could harm you. A buzzsaw is a tool that, so long as correct precautions are adhered to, is perfectly safe within the contained boundaries of a workshop. Whereas for the twisted world of Limbo, these are suddenly a snarling, deadly threat that will kill you if you don't think on your feet quickly enough. However, with every menace that you overcome, you will also find moments such as this. This is the hope I am referring to. The music of Limbo, while minimalist, can also be beautifully euphoric at times, and when such wonderful swells of strings and ambience do break through the dark, cold environment surrounding you, it's so goddamn reassuring. And with every glimpse of cruelty that this game offers, by the time you finally shatter the spell at the end, it gives the impression of having finally conquered those adolescent fears, that you pressed onwards in spite of how difficult it could be, or how horrible it became. You conquered your fear. It may not strictly be a moment filled with happiness, but it does at least now feel safe. Okay, that's it for this one. As mentioned at the start, I don't really want to get into the literal interpretation of this game's story. Plenty of other far better videos have already done this. I'd simply be repurposing existing theories if I did as well. And while I do agree with some of these theories, one of the best things about Limbo is how wonderfully malleable it can be when left to your interpretation. If there is a legitimate canonical explanation for the ending of this game, I almost don't want to know about it. I'd rather stay in the dark and simply be in the world of Limbo. I love it here, and I hope that this video, this rambly, preachy, hyperbolic video, at least expresses some of that. Because I haven't felt this damn creative or inspired by a game or script in months. That burnout shit I mentioned before, I'm certain hasn't entirely gone away, but I adored making this video, and I hope that you enjoyed it. As always, I want to thank my incredible followers on Patreon for their continued support, in particular the highest tiers, Game Master, DarkRaptor86, BFD Survivor, and Shikotsky. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you on the next review.